Hi, my name is Brooke. I want to share with you a story about how very strange things began to happen in our city. Mystically strange things. Suddenly, people began to behave extremely aggressive, like wild animals. I wanted to find out the reason behind it, and of course the truth. If you're not afraid of blood, secrets, and mysterious truth, watch the video till the end. And do not forget to share the video with your friends. I've lived in a town for many years, and almost all the neighbours know each other. One day, my friend Phil's parents travelled to the northeast of America and brought back a pet cat named Spicy. It was from a Maine breed. It was almost 1 metre long and weighed around 7 kilos in appearance. It was a real dog. The only difference is that it had a fluffy tail. I admired its beauty, played with it, fed it. Phil's parents loved the pet very much and spent a lot of time with it. I went to see them almost every day, and you know what? I began to notice strange things from Phil's family. Every time I asked Phil to go for a walk, he refused. Didn't even go to school. And his parents didn't mind. It was all very strange. Hey Phil, let's go for a bike ride. No, I have to be with the cat. But why? The parents are at home. It's not a child that needs to be taken care of. You don't understand. I said I need to be with Spicy. Get out of my house. Phil pushed me out onto the street. I was offended at first, but then I decided to make a phone call. His mother, Mrs. Thatcher, answered the phone. Hello? Mrs. Thatcher? Is Phil coming out today? I want to take a walk with him. Ah, is that you, Brooke? I'm afraid not. We decided to devote the whole day to the cat today, so we're at home with the whole family. Maybe another time. But you've been spending time with the cat for a week. Do you ever leave the house? You impudent boy. You call her again and I'll cut off your hands. Do you understand me? She hung up. I felt uneasy. I told my mother about everything and she decided to visit them. As a result of our talk, she was infuriated. How on earth would Phil's mother yell at my son? My mother went there alone, spent almost the whole day there, and when she came home she was silent. When I asked what happened, Mother only answered that the cats need care, so they're taking care and it's absolutely normal. The next day my mother brought the dog into the house. Mum, what's this? Our new pet. New? We've never had a pet in our house. You've always been against pets. Why did you suddenly get a dog? Now we will love and take care. Her name is Helga. Meet her. From that day on, everything went wrong in the house. I noticed that my mother became obsessed with the dog. She made dinner for it, bathed it, played with it. Then my father joined in. We also have my little brother, John, in the family, who has been hanging around with Helga all day. When I wanted to eat meat, the whole family clamped down, shouting at me, "Don't touch the dog's food." "Are you for real, Mum? I want to eat," I stated. And then they all shouted at me in return. The dog began to sleep on my bed, and when I tried to run out, the parents screamed. I moved to sleep on the sofa in the living room. A week later, I noticed that my family began to act like zombies. Helga became the head of the house. This was not okay. I wanted to change something. I went to Phil's house. The door was open, and when I went inside, I saw the whole family was haggard, thin, weak, and had a blue stain under their eyes. And it was the fat, content cat lying on the couch, smiling. Phil and his parents were sitting on the floor, looking up at Spicy. There was no reaction to my arrival. I came closer, poked Phil. He slowly turned to me. But after he turned away and continued looking at Spicy. The house was a mess, and cat food was everywhere. The cat went to the toilet where it wanted, and no one cleaned it up. There was such a terrible smell that you could go crazy. While I was going back home, I noticed that the pet stores were all destroyed. The windows were broken, the goods were taken out. The newspaper began to write that already 10,000 people were not going to work for more than 2 weeks. And those employees who went home disappeared strangely, locked themselves at home with their pets. All of our neighbours already got their own pets, but cats and dogs only. It was the apocalypse. When I got home, I saw several bags of dog food in the hallway, and my parents were still sitting next to Helga, petting her and not moving away. Suddenly, John became ill. He had a failing sickness. I got really scared, grabbed him, shouted at Mum and Dad, but they did not react. Sat like zombies, looking at the dog. I then called the ambulance. John was severely dehydrated. He was barely saved. While my brother was lying under the IV, I saw more than 12 other children were brought to the hospital. Some with severe hunger, some had abdominal pains. There were also adults, but more often children. 2 hours later, the doctor came to me. He said that they had pulled a mite from John's skin, only it was not quite ordinary, much smaller than usual, and you cannot kill it just like that. When John woke up, he couldn't remember anything, including that Helga he had been looking after for the past week. I took the mite in a test tube and ran home. I found similar cases on the internet. Putting the facts together, I began to guess. Phil, I remembered, and ran to his house. I found a similar mite on his neck, and I managed to pull it out whilst he was sleeping. And when Phil woke up, he didn't remember anything either. What happened? Why do I feel so terrible? You look like you always do, but I'll tell you what happened. Phil was in shock. We waited until his parents fell asleep and went to the cat. Oh no, Phil said. We saw dozens of ticks on Spicy's long fur. They breed on the animal, clung to people, and forced the owners to completely worship the pet. Is SCP. What is it? I've seen this before. The SCP is an organization that deals with anonymous things like these mites. They study them, put them in special rooms, guard them, study them, try to find weapons against them. We should call them. But wait, why has nothing happened to me? Maybe you're immune. We need to find out where these parasites are. Phil wrote a letter to a secret organization. They arrived only after a few hours. They flew out from another state. People in special clothes put all of the people who had pets to sleep, pulled out the mites and took the animals. They told us almost nothing because of their privacy principles. It was actual chaos that was happening in our city. It was terrifying. It turned out that one of the houses, the chaos had been going on more than a month. 2 bodies were found there. They died from hunger, and the pet continued to live amongst them. The owner's leg was gnawed by the knee. The dog had tried to eat it. From conversations of working employees in special clothes, we heard that the mites produced some special kind of enzyme that can subordinate a person to an animal. And if someone attempts to kill the pet, people will protect it by any cost, unaware of their actions. Now I understood everything, but there was still one question. Where did I get my immunity from? And are there others like me? I wanted to find out answers. While half of the city were receiving treatment, including my family, I wrote a letter to the SCP organization asking about myself. They came, took my blood for tests, measured my blood pressure, pulse, and even cut a bunch of hair from my head. The answer came in 4 days. It was a self-deleting email, so I had to read it quickly. It said that in my blood, they had found exactly the same enzyme as these mites. Where I got it from, science does not know yet. But it's clear that these creatures just didn't consider me as a person. They thought that I was one of them. This meant that if I bit someone, they would obey me. The thought made me shudder. Am I a mutant? A source of infection? What is it if it isn't ticks? Why me? I infected everyone, not them? And what, the SCP employees come after me? After I read the email, it was deleted, and the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and I saw the same people in the same suits. They said I should go with them, but I really didn't want to. I was afraid. What will they do with me? Where will they take me? I couldn't let that happen. In that moment, I attacked one of the employees, got away from his hand, and bit him. Those 2 stood away from me. They immediately asked what I wanted. Damn, that question made me feel even worse. Then I decided to run. After collecting my things, I didn't say anything to anyone. Just ran where my eyes looked. I managed to get out of this state. I'm now looking for an antidote, reason, nature for my origin, until the SCP finds me.
Hi, my name is Albert. Probably many people will now say that they would like to be in my place, that they envy such a life as I have. That's because I live in a spaceship. How it happened, I'll tell you now. I was born into a family of scientists. My parents were terribly smart people, and they met at work during the inspection of one of the spaceships. They were both employees of a very world-famous corporation. Well, I won't divulge its name. In short, the bottom line is that their schedule was unrealistically frenzied, and they spent 24 hours a day there. In general, that's how they met, just working side by side. Well, then they fell in love with each other. Dad was my mom's assistant. After a while, they decided to get married. Even the wedding they did without leaving the house. After a while, my mother got pregnant and still worked until the very last moment. They were so busy, and then she went on maternity leave and gave birth a week later. After that, my mother was forced to stay at home with me and take care of me, and my father also rarely came home and devoted most of his time to work. Over time, this affected their relationship, because it turned out that a year later, Dad had his own assistant with whom they became lovers. My mother was furious when she found out about it, and there was an incredible scandal at home. In his defense, the father could not come up with anything, but only confessed, and that's all. My mother immediately filed for divorce, and she urgently began to look for housing for us. Nothing suitable was found yet. Then my mother decided that she had to go to work, because we need money. She, as one of the best employees, was immediately taken into the former ranks. Only now there was a question about me, because I had to devote all my time to work, and I could not stay alone, and it was also unrealistic to hire a nanny who could look after me for 24 hours, and my mother didn't trust them. By the way, my father quit his job, so my mother could safely visit the workplace. In the end, on the first day, she took me with her, somehow dragging me inside and talking to the management and security. They let her leave me for one day and then look for another way out. We agreed. The whole day for me flew by unnoticed, especially nowhere and nothing I was not allowed. But still, what I saw with my eyes was simply amazing. There were so many people in white uniforms, like my mother, and they all went somewhere all the time, working with huge machines. There were huge rooms, and each of them had its own atmosphere, cosmic. I fell in love with all this at first sight, and I was so excited to become an astronaut in the future. While I was imagining myself as a pilot of such a huge ship, my mother's work was almost over, and it was only in the evening that she noticed that it was already night. Since she still had a lot of unfinished business, my mother suggested that I stay in one of the spaceships for a while, and she took me to it, and then I saw with my own eyes the unfinished ship, but it was so beautiful. My mother made me a blanket inside and asked me to lie down until she was free. Of course, when she was gone, I looked at everything. For a second, I imagined that I was in space and falling in zero gravity. I used to read books about space and had a rough idea of what it was like. Grabbing the seats, I lifted myself up in my arms and froze, imagining that I was flying and that my feet were walking in an empty space. Very conveniently, my mother brought me a snack, and it was unusual, but astronomical in special bags. The food that was there was hermetically sealed. In one of them there was a jam. It was in a tube. This is necessary so that in zero gravity the food was not scattered all over the ship. Otherwise, people there might choke on it, inhale or something. So all the food had to be quickly stuffed into your mouth. The taste was unusual, or rather not familiar, but quite passable. Did you also know that astronauts wear diapers? Isn't it funny? But it is necessary in terms of their work because they can't. We humans on Earth just run to the bathroom at any moment. And oh, by the way, in weightlessness, the people go to the toilet in time. That is hourly, because I do not feel like this. The body is rebuilt and works very differently than in normal life. When my mother came, I was sleeping in a deep sleep in an incomprehensible position, and that's all, because I played there until the last moment. My mother carried me in her arms to another building, where there was her restroom. We decided to spend the night there. It was forbidden, but my mother had too much work to do. In the morning we talked and agreed to stay there for a couple of days on the condition that I would not interfere with anyone or touch anything. I was only too happy to agree, because it was school holidays anyway, so I was all for it. Mom went back to work, and I decided to take a little walk around the building and look around. I tried to be as inconspicuous as possible, but you know, people are so busy there that they don't even look at anything when they walk down the hallways. Their eyes are always directed at some papers, just like my mother. I decided to take advantage of this and quietly ran back and forth, looking at one room, then another. After a couple of hours, I came across an interesting type of office. It was smaller than the others, and there was an exact replica of a spaceship, only slightly resembling a pod and an attraction at the same time. I realized that this thing should be spinning, but how to turn it on I can't find the button. I climbed in and pretended I was a pilot. Emotions flooded me with a new wave. I even began to talk to imaginary pilots, colleagues, choose a course and fly above the stars. Suddenly I heard some knocking, rustling, and was afraid. Damn, I promised my mother not to touch anything and not to go anywhere. I quickly hid inside the thing and kept quiet. I peeked through the crack and saw a man come in. He was pumped up and tall. He was standing up and warming up and putting on some kind of suit. And then he started walking towards my ship. I thought, now I'm really finished. He opened the lid, and I was sitting there. He even screamed a little in surprise, and then calmed down and asked who I was and what I was doing there. I jumped up and tried to run, but the door was closed. I begged him not to tell anyone about me. My uncle came up and asked me more questions, and I even cried a little because of my nerves. I was just really scared. When I calmed down, I told him everything as it was, and he smiled and said that he knew my mother. She's popular here because she's our best scientist and engineer, he said. Then he added that he didn't know she had a son. I shrugged, and he decided to tell me in confidence what the thing I was sitting in was. It turns out that this is something like a centrifuge that turns at an incredible speed to train a person and so that he gets used to living in approximate conditions in space on a ship. Son, life in space is significantly different from life on Earth. We are people who fly there thoroughly train, go through thorough training for a long time, and only then are we allowed to fly. And for this you must have good health, he said, and then he showed the sign language camera, which also stimulated the conditions of living in space. In zero gravity, our body does not weigh anything, you need to get used to it. Some may get seasick, and people are trained to avoid incidents. I realized that such a life is really difficult to prepare for. but I suddenly wanted to be in the place of this uncle. We spent a couple more hours together, and he told me a lot more interesting things. And I didn't even seem to breathe when I listened to him. Then he took me to my mother, who had already searched her son while running around the building. My mother scolded me, but I promised I wouldn't do it again. That uncle interceded, calling my interest quite healthy. When my mother cooled down, I asked if I could become an astronaut in the future, and my mother smiled and said that if I behaved well, studied, and listened to her, everything was possible. People like that uncle you met have strict discipline until you have it, she said, laughing. So we stayed at her job almost without going out, all my summer. It was the most gorgeous vacation of my life. It's a pity that I can't tell my classmates, just share it with you. But now I knew exactly what I wanted to be when I grew up. This goal motivates me to study a lot and work on myself, so I believe that in a few years I will be able to get closer to the dream and I will finally touch the stars. Wish me luck, friends.